We're Gang Cinema here with the one and only legendary Angela Davis. And I think it's really important for me to explain to the generation below and coming, what is Black August? And I would like to ask you that on camera and see what your answer is.
Well, Black August was initiated by people in prison. It's the only, I wouldn't call it a holiday, I would call it a time of reflection, a time of thinking about the part that people who are incarcerated have played in our struggle for liberation. And of course, August was the month in which George Jackson was assassinated by San Quentin guards. His brother Jonathan had been killed earlier, a year before, on August 7th. So there are numerous events that happened in the month of August that are the reason why we take this month as a time of meditation, as a time of reflection on past contributions to the struggle for liberation, for global liberation, not only for Black liberation, but for the liberation of everyone.
All right, wow. Thank you so much for your contribution to the just everything, my man. Thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Okay.
All right.
From representing generations, representing movements, actually constitutes an enormous space. So I'm really happy to be here this afternoon. And I'd like to thank Frederica. I think she was the first one I heard from. I heard from Jack and several other people, but thank you so much for asking me to be a part of this event. Like Erica, I said, oh my God, I have a 6 a.m. flight out the next morning. How can I do this? But then when I thought about the significance of Black August and celebrating George Jackson for the work that he's done, coming together to collectively greet Rochelle McGee, who was just recently released after 64 years behind bars, there was no question in my mind. I said, of course I want to be here this afternoon to participate in this gathering. Now, this is the 52nd anniversary year since the death of George Jackson at the hands of San Quentin guards. And as we all know, Black August is a tradition that was initiated by people inside. I think it's probably the only tradition, and I'm not saying holiday because it's not about holiday, it's not about, some people say that Black August should be Black History Month, but I think we need as many months as we can get. Black August is very specifically a time to reflect on the contributions of those who are no longer with us, and to imagine the future in revolutionary ways. So before I actually say a few words about, because I've been asked to speak about George Jackson's contributions to abolitionist theories and practices, but before I say that, I want to acknowledge that this is one of those rare moments when we have something to celebrate. And Rochelle McGee is the longest held political prisoner in the history of this country. now among what we call those who inhabit the free world. And I just want to thank everybody who worked so hard, particularly during this last period, to guarantee his release, because it was not guaranteed. Even though he has done more time than could ever be imagined, they were not going to release him without the really hard work of all of the various individuals and organizations. I know Jack, the labor, what's the name of the Labor Action Committee?
Labor Action Committee to Free Mumia.
Labor Action Committee to Free Mumia did an enormous amount of work, particularly during this last period. And I know the Coalition to Free Rochelle McGee really worked a great deal. I've been in touch with Jonathan Jackson Jr., who also did an enormous amount of work on the Coalition to Free Rochelle McGee. So, yeah, we have something to celebrate. And, you know, even though he should have never gone to prison in the first place.
All right.
So we never should have been confronted with this task of trying to guarantee his release from prison. But I am told that he said that the only thing he really wanted to do was to go back to Louisiana and go fishing. So I'm just praying that he gets to do that. Now before, I forgot to take note of what time it was when I started, so I'm going to get you my timekeeper.
Take your time.
Let me know. Before I try to talk for a few minutes about Georgia's important role in the development of prison abolition theories and practices, I want to say that Rochelle was the very first person I encountered, and I just had this conversation with Dorsey a moment ago, who talked about the relationship between slavery and imprisonment. As a matter of fact, when he was my co-defendant in the aftermath of the August 7th rebellion, he referred to it as a slave rebellion. And I listened to it, but it didn't make that much sense at the time. And it wasn't until later that I realized the powerful insight that was behind that designation of the rebellion at the Marin County Courthouse as a slave rebellion. And of course now many, many books have been written about the relationship between slavery and imprisonment. Rochelle was among the first to have that insight, and certainly the first person I met who made me think more seriously about the relationship between imprisonment and slavery. Now, I want to share a poem as well. And it's about Rochelle. And it was written by Julia Wright, the daughter of Richard Wright,
Yes.
who has been involved in a whole number of cases involving prisons, even though she lives in Paris, which is where she was born after Richard Wright moved to Europe. And so this is what she wrote after learning that finally Rochelle was free. Tell us, what is the opposite of the blues? Because there is such a thing as struggle-shaking news. No words to say in its accept laughter in our hearts. Mother Earth feels the tremors of hope in our souls. The ancestors are drumming at our side. We are beginning to hear the cascade of falling dominoes. Our pens were straws dipped into darkness. Now each word we write is a deep gulp of light. And this poem was published in connection with an effort to raise funds for Michelle. And I think that if you haven't already donated, you can go to the website. It's fundraiser, fundrazr.com. And help the brother out. Now, George. George Jackson was a harbinger of abolitionist movements to come. And as a person, the opportunity and the honor to have an extended conversation with him through letters over a period of time about the prison movement, which is what we called it at that time. He truly opened my eyes because during those days, many of us who were involved in these campaigns were involved in campaigns to free political prisoners, which was really important. Vast numbers of members of the Black Panther Party were in prison. But we didn't necessarily think beyond that issue of freeing political prisoners. And as someone who got involved in the campaign to free political prisoners, well, my mother was involved in the Scottsboro 9 case. So that kind of runs, generationally, as Erica was talking about, through my family. But I had never stopped to think about the role that the institution of the prison itself plays in shaping racism. And this is what George did. George began to think about what we now call structural racism at a time when few people were going beyond the question of getting people out of prison. Not thinking about the part that the institution of the prison plays in shaping our society, and specifically as one of the most dramatic examples of what we call structural racism. He was, this is why I say he was a harbinger of abolitionist movements to come. He focused on the structural and the institutional dimensions of racism long before we had developed the vocabulary that now allows us to speak about structural racism. And another thing, he made the argument then that recognizing the contributions of people behind bars, bringing the movement into prisons could be radically transformative for those in the free world. So he foresaw what has been increasingly developed over the last decades. That is to say, an understanding, and I think all of us who are here know that one of the reasons that we need to accelerate our call for prison abolition is because of the fact that there's so much energy, so much creativity, so much so many ideas. The intellectual energy in prisons is such that if we got rid of prisons, we would have the insight. I'm talking about what George Jackson did, the way in which his insight represents what we are just now learning how to talk about. I think that the fact that the transformation that could occur not only in this country but throughout the world if we openly greeted the contributions of people who are prisoners or formerly incarcerated people. And of course, Dorsey knows this because that's the work that he's been doing for many years. But I know I'm probably beyond my time now, but I just want to point to the 99 books in George's cell. That we should continue to go back to that book list. The books that were discovered in his cell after he was assassinated. There were 99 books. So look at that book list. He was reading what all of us are reading out here, but he was able to develop a kind of insight that allowed him to think perhaps even more deeply about that work. And what was so remarkable, just a couple of other points, was his capacity to bring issues and themes together that reflected new ways of thinking. And I do want to say a couple of words about patriarchy. Because I noticed on the list that there are hardly any women on that list, hardly any women authors. But he does have a volume of June Jordan's poetry, which kind of makes up for the lack of representation. And I'm certain that that had it not been killed, that he would be involved. And I say this because I also had the privilege of communicating with him about this subject. And he had some backward ideas about black women that were influenced by the prevailing ideology, and especially by the Moynihan. Daniel Moynihan, who did this report called Moynihan Report on the Negro family. And what Moynihan argued was that the major problem with black families and black communities were that women were matriarchs. He had this thesis about the black matriarchy, that women were in control of the family and the community. And one of the points that he made was that black men could learn more about masculinity and how to be a man by going into the military services, by learning how to kill people. But that's another whole story. But George tended to narrativize his relationship with his mother in those ideological terms that had come from the Moynihan Report and what was happening at the time. That black women attempted to prevent black men from making revolutionary contributions. And I just want to say, and this is the last point, that when he published Soul Editor, and I remember it was published right around the time I was arrested, and I went into the Women's House of Detention in New York. And he sent me a letter asking me to apologize to the sisters because what he writes in Soledad Brother did not reflect the way his thinking about women's role had evolved. And I'm just so sorry that we never got to, in terms of the people who read his work, that they never got to recognize that. But he was very concerned that he not be thought of in the way that he had sometimes represented himself in relation to patriarchy in Soledad Brother. So, I think probably that's all I need to say. Because, we are at a particular moment in the development of the liberation movement. And those of us who had the opportunity to experience earlier moments are really privileged to be able to see where we are now, as difficult as our circumstances are. I know for one, I feel really privileged that I am still on this earth and I'm still able to witness the ways in which the movements are unfolding, and that those of us who are up in the years, I won't point anybody out, but it's our responsibility to bear witness for those who are no longer with us, and to continue to share the legacies of George Jackson and
Okay, thank you so much. Angela Davis.